Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Baltic Scouting Podcast. We're right around the corner to the college football playoff, which will be happening on Saturday. Michigan versus TCU and Ohio State versus Georgia. Super exciting time, especially for NFL draftniks like us who get to watch tons of these top NFL draft prospects face off against each other. You excited, Alex?
Oh, totally. This time is kind of really exciting time. Um, we see a bunch of guys start to declare for the draft, guys opt out of bowl games, and your opinion on that can be, whatever it is. But we see all these names kind of either throw their name into the draft circle or, decide to stay in college for another year. And before we kind of get started talking about the college football playoffs, I wanted to bring up Kayshon Boutte, the LSU wide receiver. He had previously said that he was going back to school. And I just saw a couple hours ago that he is now opting out of the bowl game and declaring for the draft. So just something worth noting. Why did he flip-flop back and forth? Not really sure. But yeah, he is now declaring for the draft.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting at first that he decided to go back to school. It seemed like a situation where he didn't get the most out of what he could have this season, and there seemed to be conflict between him and the team. At one point, he was taking the team out of his bio, that sort of stuff. I was surprised he went back to school in the first place. This is kind of the decision I was expecting from the start.
Yeah, it kind of seemed like he his reasoning for going back to school might have been he wasn't getting the draft grades he would have wanted, and then maybe he got some new information, or maybe he was like, I'd rather just go into the NFL. I don't want another year at LSU. So whatever the reason is, he will be declared, or he did declare for the draft, so he will be being taken probably fairly early on in the draft.
Yeah, I think especially at the wide receiver position, I think the boards are going to fall very differently from team to team. There's not really any dominant guy or really like a 1-2 order. So I think that he's got a shot at being pretty high up on certain wide receiver draft boards across the league.
Yeah, totally, totally. I haven't done a ton of research into this wide receiver class yet, but from what I've been hearing, it doesn't seem like it's as deep as it normally is. So it'll be interesting to see how these wide receivers pan out. And with that said, talking about wide receivers, maybe we can hop into our first of the college football playoff games. Why don't we start off with Michigan versus TCU? And I bring that game up because the top wide receiver in this game is Quentin Johnson, the wide receiver for TCU. And to me, is extremely impressive. We've watched him last offseason. I wasn't probably a huge fan. And I watched him again this season, his 2022 tape, and I was just extremely impressed. At 6'5", some of the things that he can do, I'm just in awe of. The way he can move for someone that tall, he almost looks like a basketball player at certain times. To me, really impressive wide receiver.
I'm not as high on him. I have like a late first round grade on him. One thing that concerns me is the lack of route running. I think he runs a pretty limited route tree, and there's not much nuance to it. And we've seen, albeit not as talented of a prospect, but a guy like Jalen Reagor transition from the TCU spread offense to the NFL with a lot of difficulty. And I think Johnston could face a kind of an uphill battle when he gets to the NFL with some of his raw route running. And the other thing that bothers me is, as physically talented as he is with that size and that athleticism, that leaping ability, I find him to be pretty inconsistent in terms of dominating other players physically. You see some flashes of contested catch ability. Often it's because, he has the insane catch radius to go up and get it. But when he's actually tasked with going up and getting it with a cornerback playing the ball as well, he doesn't have the alpha mentality that I would want from a wide receiver of that size. So between the inconsistent physicality in that sense and the raw route running, I do recognize how much talent he has. The athleticism, the run after catch ability is off the charts, but I'm not sold that he's going to be an NFL star. So that's why I see him more as a late first rounder.
That's understandable. I have towards a mid first round, kind of that right outside the top 10, kind of probably that 15 range for me. I really can't get out of my head his ability to kind of break tackles and make guys miss as, a player that's 6'5". I think he would benefit from adding a little bit of muscle I think he still is a little bit thin, which you can kind of expect for someone that tall. And I think if he does add a little bit of muscle, he might improve his contested catchability even more.
Yeah.
I think we can move on to some other guys in this game. Let's stay in the TCU offense for a second.
Hmm.
What do you think about Max Duggan? He's a really interesting story. He's coming into that starting role at TCU, Heisman Trophy finalist. But how do you think he projects to the NFL?
Honestly, better than people are saying. I think that he's doesn't really have anything special going for him, but there's no big weakness. When I'm looking at my list of weaknesses as I'm watching his film, it's kind of like a lot of things that fall under the miscellaneous category. Like he'll hold the ball too long there. He'll miss occasionally on like a comeback route or something like that. It's not really like, okay, he's got a couple glaring issues that are going to drag him down in the NFL. So for a player that doesn't really have any big strengths, doesn't really have any big weaknesses, but I think that when you put him in the game, he's going to be able to go through his progressions, find the open man, more often than not, deliver the ball accurately, and he does have his legs to rely on as a running threat if he needs them. I like him as a career-long backup, and even by the time he's a few years into the NFL, as a high-end quarterback too.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, right? I didn't see a ton of huge strengths, but like you said, I didn't see a ton of big weaknesses either.
Mhm.
And what really kind of piqued my interest into Max Duggan, more than just a normal draft prospect quarterback, was his play in the Big 12 championship game. He really put the team on his back. He was the leader of that team. He did not give up. It reminded me a little bit. I know this is a little bit of a different situation, but Justin Fields in the college football playoff game
Mhm.
against Clemson, when
Oh,
he
yeah,
really put the team on his
legendary.
back, he was getting beat up, taking huge hits,
Yep.
and he just kept fighting, kept going, willed that team to victory. I know TCU didn't win, but it was not because of Max Duggan. There were a couple questionable play calls here and there that could have been changed, but to me, he really put the team on his back. Like you mentioned, he can progress through his reads, which is really big for a guy that projects as a backup quarterback, and maybe a low level starter here and there.
Yeah. The Big 12 is kind of seen as a conference where the offenses across the board are better than the defenses, and that was often the case that he had the better offense than the opposing defense. So I think it's going to be really important for him to have a solid game against Michigan. I don't know necessarily about being able to get them the win. Obviously, that would be ideal, but I think Michigan's a really talented team. That defense is stout, though. So I think it's going to be really important for him to be able to show NFL scouts, look, I did not struggle. I actually had a good game against one of the top defenses.
Yeah, and speaking of that top defense in the country, Michigan has a few draft prospects, starting with
Mhm.
one of Bruce Feldman's freaks from his Freak Lesson 2022, and that's Maisie Smith, the defensive tackle.
Yeah, Mozzie Smith is a guy who I think is going to soar off up draft boards. He's going to be a first round pick, in my opinion. I honestly really like his tape. I see so much potential in him. He's just instantly off the ball, constantly in the opposing backfield, getting behind his blocker, using his strength, his athleticism. There's even a semblance of pass rush moves that he can definitely build on. And the sack totals are not high at all. I think he had 2 half sacks, so 1 sack total on the season, but he's consistently generating pressure. And as you refine his game and his pass rush arsenal, those can turn into sacks. And I think he's also very good against the run. I think what concerns me a little bit is he did have that arrest recently in which, so he got pulled over for speeding, and then he got arrested because he had an unlicensed gun, which he said is because people are knowing him a lot, so he's not comfortable with that. That concerns me a little bit. I don't want a player who might be a little paranoid carrying around a gun for that reason. It's not a big deal, but full disclosure, I will probably knock his grade a little bit because of that. But he's a guy I think is going to go first round, and he has a lot of potential.
Yeah, I think for the size that he is, about 6'3", 330 pounds. It's a little bit of a different build because he's so thick and a little bit on the shorter side. I know 6'3" isn't short, but normally when I see a guy that's that weighs that much, they're usually a little bit taller. So he's got a lot of strength, a lot of power behind him. He really, in his stance on the defensive line, he really loads himself up. He's really tight in his stance. He explodes out like a spring, and he's extremely strong. He really holds his ground in the run game. He makes a lot of plays. Even if it's not making tackles, he's plugging the holes, giving the offensive lineman a problem, and he's constantly double teamed. I think there were probably a handful of plays that I could count where he was only one on one, and that was a problem regardless of the defense. I mean, regardless of the offense. So I totally agree. I think his testing numbers and stuff will be off the charts, and that will shoot him up draft boards because we know NFL GMs love physical freaks. And I'm not going to name any names, but I think we can remember one from last year that flew up draft boards.
Oh yeah, I mean he's going to blow the roof off the combine, and that nowadays NFL GMs really just want guys who can give pressure from the interior, and that's what he does.
How many Aaron Donald comparisons do we hear? Because he's a shorter guy, really strong, super athletic, freaky tester. I'm not comparing him to Aaron Donald, but I would be shocked to at least not hear that once during the draft process.
We'll hear it. And one guy on the defensive side for Michigan that I'm intrigued by is DJ Turner, the cornerback, because I think he's going to be facing a big test from the TCU receivers and highlighted by Quentin Johnston. I like Turner. I think he's a guy who's got good fluidity, good quickness to stay in phase. I think where he often loses is in his lack of route anticipation. He tries to just follow the wide receivers every movement because he has the athletic abilities to do so. Sometimes that leads to wasted steps on his part and he falls behind because of it, but it is correctable. So I think he could definitely be a quality starter in the NFL, but it'll be big for him to be able to show that he gets some good reps in against Quentin Johnston.
Yeah, DJ Turner's quick. One of the biggest things that hopped off the tape for me was his ability to break on the ball. I think even if he may look beat when the ball's thrown, he's got great quickness, great ability to react to the ball in the air, and he can really make up ground quickly once that ball is thrown and break up some passes that might have looked like they would have been completed if it was another cornerback covering him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think TCU also has a cornerback that's worth keeping an eye on. Travius Hodges-Tomlinson. He's on the shorter side at 5'9", but he plays so much bigger than that side. I mean, he's definitely got that dog in him, and he's got good quickness, good fluidity to stay in phase, a high football IQ. He reads the quarterback really well to break on the pass. You're going to have to live with him losing some jump balls and getting glued to run blocks because of that lack of size, but he's definitely a starting cornerback in the NFL too.
Yeah, I think we can move on now to the other playoff or semifinal game, and this is Georgia versus Ohio State. Georgia has a lot of talent. Once again, second year in a row that they really are loaded on, especially that defensive side of the ball, I think, with, a guy that could potentially be considered the top overall prospect in the draft in Jalen Carter.
Jalen Carter is crazy, man. Jalen Carter, he's just such a fun watch. He's the way that he gets off the ball instantly. He's in the opposing backfield before you can even blink, and he stays so low, maintains leverage, bursts into the backfield, uses his arms. He has a swim move that will work against the offensive lineman every single time. Just gets past them that way so consistently. I think Jalen Carter is definitely a top two player in this draft class. I think it's between him and Will Anderson. He's going to be a perennial Pro Bowler. I said it last year. He was the best player already on that Georgia defense, that Georgia defensive line that already had the first overall pick in Trevon Walker, plus Devontae Wyatt and Jordan Davis. He was already the best.
Yeah, you watch 3 plays of the Georgia defense, and you can see how good Jalen Carter is. I mean, there's some minor possible character concerns with him. There was a report, but I'm not too concerned about it. I think you can touch on a little bit more than I can. He's just a great player. He is ferocious. He never gives up on a play. He is so quick too. I saw him chase down a few ball carriers when there's no reason a defensive tackle should be able to move that quickly and even make a play once. So just all around outstanding player. Not really more to say about that. I really don't think he has any true weaknesses. He's just going to be, like you said, a perennial Pro Bowler with all pro potential.
Yeah, the NFL has been starved of high-end defensive tackle prospects the last few years. We saw a guy, Derek Brown, who we knew was going to be a good NFL player because he stuffs the run so well. He came with such obvious pass rush limitations. You knew he was never going to be a 10 sack type of guy, and he still went 7th overall. So Carter is going to go really high. And to touch on those character concerns you brought up, that was based on a report really out of the blue by Todd McShay that Carter doesn't really get along with everyone. You're going to be questioning how he's going to fit into a locker room. And then there was an outpour of support from his teammates, quoting that tweet on Twitter and talking about how he's really one of the best guys they know. A lot of Georgia beat reporters saying they haven't heard a single bad thing about him. So, I mean, you make of that what you will, but I wouldn't really be too concerned with that. It looks like McShay really got the outlash at him for that. Carter's a phenomenal player. I just can't wait to see him play in the NFL.
Another guy on that Georgia defense that projects to go pretty high in the draft, Kelee Ringo, the cornerback. And those of you that aren't, too familiar with college football, Ringo was the guy that had the game-sealing interception in the national championship game last year. I am a little bit torn on Ringo. I see some really good plays, and I see some plays that just kind of leave me just shaking my head a little bit. Like, he shows some good potential on some plays. I'm like, where is this coming from? I think he's a little inconsistent. I see a lot of people kind of talking about him as a first round pick. I personally don't think I'm going to have a first on him as of right now.
I think Ringo's the most overrated player in this draft class. You see him in the top 10 on some boards. I don't get it. If you turn on the tape, he's getting beat all the time. I'm sorry, but just like he is. He's passive in coverage. He cannot stop on a dime. If you just run a comeback route against him, he's getting beat every single time, like clockwork. He cannot match a really speedy guy, a really sudden mover, someone who runs really good routes because he lacks the route anticipation. I just see Ringo getting beat way too much. I wonder just how highly the NFL thinks of him. Maybe his draft stock's getting boosted by the media because he had that iconic play to seal the national championship game, because he plays in Georgia's incredible defense. Maybe the NFL likes him that much too, because when it comes down to it, he's got great size and he's probably going to run a fast 40. But I think you got to squint really hard and have a lot of faith in your defensive back coach to imagine him being a star at the cornerback position in the NFL.
You mentioned those comeback routes. I think I counted either 4 or 5 in the Tennessee game that he just consistently got in, and it was the same wide receiver too. You have to know it's coming at some point.
Yeah.
He ran the route the exact same way. He was on the exact same side of the field, and every single time the wide receiver made it look like he was going upfield, stopped on a dime, turned around, and Ringo ran right past him. And there were a couple plays where he just completely whiffed on the tackle afterwards. I do see him make some good plays on the ball. Obviously, he had the interception in the national championship game, which, in all honesty, wasn't that great of an athletic play by him. The ball was a little bit kind of up in the air a little bit. Obviously, good on him for making that play, sealing the national championship. You can't take that away from him. But I totally agree with you that he is overrated. I see him some scouts, analysts have him as the cornerback 1 or cornerback 2, just not really what I'm seeing. And I think we're kind of on the same page there. Like you mentioned, it will be interesting to see when draft rumors start to come out, if Ringo is talked about as highly as he is right now. We see that from time to time with guys where the draft media, Instagram analysts, Twitter scouts really like a player and they fall in the draft, and it's because the NFL just didn't really see players that highly.
Yeah. Well, talking about this Georgia defense, I cannot wait to see the matchup of the defense versus CJ Stroud, and particularly what CJ Stroud does with it. I still really like CJ Stroud. He was our QB1 going into the year. Not sure if he's going to stay QB1 ahead of Bryce Young, but Stroud is a guy who he's just so good at the things that young quarterbacks struggle at. He's a really good decision maker. He senses pressure well, climbs the pocket against it. He has a good internal clock. He doesn't take sacks because he holds the ball too long like so many young quarterbacks. He's just so refined in those aspects. I think he could be more accurate. Sometimes he misses throws. I think part of it is mechanical issues. Part of it is just that he hasn't developed his touch yet. So you're taking a little bit of a leap of faith that he's going to be able to improve in terms of the consistency of his accuracy and his ball placement, because I do want to mentioned that sometimes he absolutely flashes the ability to have perfect ball placement. But overall, CJ Stroud is a quarterback that I would pick in the top 10, that I think is going to be a franchise quarterback. But wow, that's going to be a test against the Georgia defense. I'm really excited to see what he does.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's going to be a huge test, probably his biggest test of the season. Obviously, he played in Michigan. He had a couple poor decisions in that game when he was, kind of trying to will the team back after they got down a little bit.
Yeah,
My
part of it, a couple of those plays, it was just because it was the end of the game and he absolutely had to force it.
Oh, exactly. I don't really take too much away from him when they're down, whatever it was, 2 scores with a couple minutes left. Sometimes you just have to take that risk, and it's not always going to work out well. The one my little concern about Stroud is that my concern coming into the year is still my concern coming out of the year.
Mhm.
And it's his inconsistency with ball placement. Like
Yeah,
you mentioned, there are plays where there's beautiful ball placement, but there's other plays I'm like, where did this come from? And I saw the same exact thing last year. I do also think he's going to be a really good quarterback in the NFL. I'm just a little concerned about the inconsistency is still there. I didn't
yeah.
really see much improvement because in my opinion, he's still as inconsistent this year as he was last year. Um, and he does benefit from, I don't want to take this away from him, but he does benefit from one of the best wide receiver rooms in the country,
Yeah.
which can make your task at quarterback a little bit easier at the college level. He does progress through his reads, but oftentimes he doesn't need to get past the first one because his first wide receiver's open. Again, you can't fault him for that. If he's open, throw the ball. I mean, I'd rather have him throw the ball to his first read if he's open than go on to his second read just to say I can do it. But just, some little things for me and the lack of improvement on the inconsistent ball placement from last year concerns me a little bit.
I used to be like really wary of a lack of improvement, and then I saw Justin Herbert really like struggle to improve his 3 years at Oregon and then just shine in the NFL. So I think at the end of the day, part of it is because he's getting the same coaching this year that he's getting last year. It's the same coaching staff. So once he gets to the NFL draft preparation and he's like working with a quarterback guru, and then he gets to the NFL and he's working with a quarterbacks coach and an OC of an even higher level, maybe then they'll come. So I do give him the benefit of the doubt. Obviously, I'm still a little wary, but I do to an extent.
That's a really fair point because, oftentimes when looking back at our, scouting misses, we say, where did this come from? We said that with Justin Herbert.
Mhm.
Where did this huge jump come from? And, you brought up a really good point that I never really thought about too much before, that he's stuck with the same coach in
Yeah,
college. Obviously, Ryan Day isn't going anywhere. And he's a really good college head
yeah,
coach. But there's just some things you can't get from a college head coach that you get from an NFL head coach or NFL positional coaches. We see these, huge changes in all positions, but quarterbacks especially sometimes in their rookie year, and we go, how'd this change all of a sudden after we saw him stagnant for a couple of years? So I think that's a really good point that you bring up.
yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the quarterback on the other side of the ball, Stetson Bennett. Now, I know he's contrary to Stroud, who's going to be a first round pick. Stetson Bennett is not a big ticket NFL draft prospect. He's a guy who walked onto Georgia. The thought of him being in the NFL at all is something that nobody would have ever saw it coming. But are you willing to bet against Stetson Bennett sticking on an NFL roster for like a 5 to 10 year career? Because I'm not. I'm not willing to bet against him.
Oh, no way. I don't think he's going to be a long-term starter in the NFL. I think similar to Max Duggan, he doesn't have really any, great traits. I think he does all the little things really well.
Yeah.
Um, Again, he's on a great offense, a great team, but he makes, all the right decisions. He throws the ball to his open receiver. I think he has a better arm than some guys give him credit for. We do see him launch the ball sometimes down the field. He's a guy that I really think could be, a 10, 12-year NFL backup, and a guy that comes in as a spot starter and can rally a team to victories, when the starting quarterback is out.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if he might be a late rounder, he might even go undrafted, but I think he's going to outdo his draft position.
I think he'll get drafted. I think
Yeah.
we see how important the backup quarterback is now more than ever. Look at Miami, right? Tua's week 17. Tua can't start. Teddy Bridgewater, who in his own right is a really good backup quarterback. has to come in and, in a must-win game for the Dolphins. So we see how important that backup quarterback position is. I would not be shocked to see him, get drafted on day 3.
The problem is he's not 6 foot. I think that's what's going to really hurt him. I don't think
That's
it should hurt him as much as it will, but man, is someone drafting a quarterback who's not 6 foot?
well, a lot of people have Bryce Young as their QB1 in this draft.
Yeah, but that he presents a different skill set. Like we're talking about a limited quarterback who's not 6 foot. I would argue in his favor. I'm just saying I think that's what's really going to push him down draft boards.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, I guess if you have two guys that are pretty similar, you're going to want to go with a guy that's 6'3", 6'4", instead of 5'11".
Well, who else in this matchup are you looking forward to watching?
So we had this little conversation before we hopped on air. Darnell Washington, the tight end for Georgia, is a guy that really, really intrigues me.
Yeah.
He is a physical freak. He's 6'7". He is a massive, massive tight end, and he's the tight end 2 for Georgia. And those of you that have been following us for a little while now, I tend to have these little draft crushes on tight end 2s that are underutilized.
Tommy Tremble.
Remember Tommy Tremble. But I was just really surprised by what I saw on tape. He's a very good blocker.
Oh, yeah.
He's obviously 6'7". He's not the fastest guy in the world. He doesn't run the greatest routes. His routes are a little bit rounded, but he is a great blocker. He can line up in the backfield, be a lead blocker. I also think he brings a lot of value. Instead of pulling a 6th offensive lineman onto the field, you can put him, lined up as an inline tight end, and he can do a very good job blocking.
Yes.
I just see a lot of value in what he brings to the table. Is he a first-round pick? No. But I see a lot of value in his skill set, his special physical talents and abilities, and he's a guy that I'm going to be a fan of this whole draft process.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I think he is pretty limited as a receiver, and he's mostly going to be like a security blanket guy where he can pop off the side of the line of scrimmage, the offensive line, and get like a 5-8 yard gain. But he's an elite blocker, and that's why I think he might even start in the NFL because he's just so valuable in that role. Fortunately for him, the tight end position is still viewed by fans as primarily a receiving position, even though you could argue that the importance of receiving and blocking is really 50-50. So people won't really be seeing crazy production from him, and he might be underappreciated his whole career, but I totally get where you're coming from. Two guys that I'm interested in this matchup are the 2 tackles on either side of the ball. Broderick Jones and Paris Johnson. I think I was impressed really by both their tapes. I think they're both mid-first round prospect. Broderick Jones might not have ideal measurables, but he's got good athleticism, good strength, good technique, really all-around solid guy. Paris Johnson is a guy who really impressed me this season. I was skeptical about his ability to transition from guard to tackle and play well because I thought when he was isolated in pass protection at guard, he struggled despite being a really good run blocker. And I saw him play so much better this season in pass protection. In his first year at tackle, I think his base is still a little too narrow. His anchor could be a little better, but he's got really good technique, really good hand-feet coordination. He's got the athleticism to guard the edge. And and sometimes when he gives up ground, he does have the length to cover, and you see him being able to prevent pressures from turning into sacks. So Paris Johnson's a guy who's going to be a good left tackle in the NFL, in my opinion, which is not something I thought I was going to say this summer.
Yeah, I was interesting to see what you're going to think about Paris Johnson because we both talked about this, in our preseason talks. Paris Johnson was moving from guard to tackle, and we were skeptical about his abilities. I 100% agree with you. When I turned on that Paris Johnson tape, I was impressed by what I saw. He was much better than I expected at tackle. Before the season, I thought he was going to have to move back to guard to make the most out of his NFL potential. I don't agree with that sentiment now. I think he'll be a good tackle, and I also think that he's a first-round talent.
Yeah. Oh, before we get into the game picks, I think that's really most of the draft eligible guys that we're looking at. But let's take a little peek at the future and look at some of these guys that are not draft eligible yet, but are really great NFL draft prospects. Because there's a couple guys. Who are you really looking at who isn't going to hear their name called in 2023 because they're just too young, but they would be going really high if they could be?
I mean, the first one is Brock Bowers. He's the reason that Darnell Washington is the tight end too. I think there's a strong argument to be made that Bowers is the best tight end in college football right now. He is a dynamic receiving threat, really a special talent. I think, I see no reason as to why he wouldn't be going a top 10 pick in, would it be 2024? So just a special, special player.
He's going to be churning out 1,000-yard receiving seasons in the NFL. Just use him right. Don't pick him fourth overall like the Atlanta Falcons and not use him like Kyle Pitts. As long as you're using him as a guy that is your go-to receiver, really is what I think is going to be an NFL offense. He's going to shine. And I want to talk a little bit about Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, his father, Marvin Harrison, for the Indianapolis Colts, was a fantastic player. Call me crazy or don't, because it's not even that controversial of a take. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to have a better NFL career than his father
did. I mean, I'm not saying anything. Marvin Harrison Sr. was an NFL Hall of Famer.
Oh yeah.
So that is
I think Marvin Harrison Jr. can be just as good, if not better.
He is a amazing receiver. I mean, coming into this season, we talked about Ohio State's receiver Jackson Smith-Njigba. He's been out the whole season with a hamstring injury, I'm pretty sure. And Marvin Harrison Jr. was a better receiver than Jackson Smith-Njigba was last year. All facets of the wide receiver game, Marvin Harrison Jr. is just so good. He has good speed, good hands. He's a good route runner. He checks off all the boxes, and he's got another year left of college football.
I think the second he steps into the NFL, he has the best body control of any wide receiver in the league.
That is 100% fair. There was that sideline catch. It wasn't a touchdown or anything. Was it against Indiana? I cannot remember who it was against.
That was Michigan. I mean, there's probably a couple. I'm thinking of one against Michigan where DJ Turner's working on him, and he contorts his body in a way that I never would have thought possible.
Yeah, there's a screenshot where his leg is all the way. There's no reason that he should have made that catch and been in bounds when his entire body was out of bounds besides his foot. Just some of the things that he could do, just absolutely amazing. One guy from Michigan that I want to bring up, we've been talking about DJ Turner a lot, the corner. Another Michigan corner, Will Johnson. He's a true freshman, and he really had a big coming out party against Purdue. He had 2 interceptions. I think he's going to be a really good cornerback as well. We got to wait 2 years for him to come out, so still a lot of things, that will have to go right in order for him to stay on this track. But just a name to watch out for in this college football playoff and the next 2 years in college football.
Yeah, I hope he stays dialed in, because I remember thinking Derek Stingley was the best cornerback in the country as a freshman, and then he kind of fell off his last couple seasons. He had a good rookie year, though. But Will Johnson, I agree with you, is a really good prospect who we're going to be hearing about in the next couple of years. I think we can get into our game picks. Alex, who do you think's winning that first game between TCU and Michigan?
I have to go with Michigan. I would love to see TCU win. I mean, it makes a good story. I do, I like the TCU team. I like Max Duggan. I like what he's done the whole year. But I just think Michigan's going to overmatch TCU with talent. I don't think it's going to be super close. I think Michigan probably wins by 2 scores at least. I just, they're just a really good team. One of the best offensive lines, if not the best offensive line in the country, one of the best defensive lines in the country, 2 really good corners. I mean, I just think they're going to outmatch the TCU offense and defense.
I agree with you. I think it could be a blowout. I'm picking Michigan. I think that their running offense is going to really dominate TCU. TCU's defense is a 3-3-5, where it's really just built for defending passing games. And Michigan's going to say, okay, we won't pass the ball that much. We're just going to run down your throat and do it very effectively all game and wear you down that way too. So I think that's what's going to happen in that game.
Yeah, so we both agree on Michigan. Who are you taking for the Georgia-Ohio State game?
Man, I'm going to take Georgia, but this one actually I think will be a closer game than Michigan-TCU, despite the fact that it's the 1-4 matchup that we have seen several times be kind of a blowout where Cincinnati couldn't hang with Alabama. Before that, Notre Dame couldn't hang with Alabama. I wouldn't be surprised if Ohio State hangs with Alabama. We saw a couple years ago Justin Fields go into that game against Clemson. He was number two to Trevor Lawrence his whole pretty much his whole life, it feels like. And
He
he made
took
a
it personally.
took it personally, and he played fantastic. I think CJ Stroud's going to go out there. He's going to have a good game against a really good Georgia defense because he is a top NFL draft prospect, one of the best quarterbacks in the country. He's going to find a way to have a good game. He's got great receivers with him. He's got a good offensive line. I think Ohio State's gonna really make this a close game, though I think Georgia is just a more talented team, and in the end, they do get the win.
And that's why I'm taking Ohio State.
Wow.
I went back and forth on this. I just think CJ Stroud is going to outplay Stetson Bennett. I think the Georgia offense is more dynamic. I mean, the Ohio State offense is more dynamic than the Georgia offense. I think they both have really good defenses. I think Ohio State is going to be playing angry. They lost to Michigan for the second year in a row. This hasn't happened in 20 years. They didn't win the Big Ten. They want to go to the national championship. They want to play Michigan in the national championship, and they want to beat Michigan in the national championship. I'm taking Ohio State to beat Georgia as an upset.
I think if Ohio State beats Georgia, they beat Michigan in the national championship. I think, take two. I think they get them.
Yeah, I'll say it right now. Right now, I'm taking Ohio State to win the national championship. Again, playing angry. Already lost to Michigan once. Not happening for what would be a third time in a row. Second time this season. Arguably the best quarterback in the draft. Arguably the best wide receiver in college football. I just think the stars have aligned unlikely for Ohio State.
Yeah. And it's hard to go back to back as national champions. As good as Georgia is, it is hard. And last time the Ohio State Buckeyes were the number 4 team in the college football playoff in the inaugural edition of the college football playoff, they went and won the national championship. So that's a bold take from Alex. That's what we're here for, though. And it's going to be a really fun college football playoff. A lot of prospects to keep an eye on. If you want to refer back to this video for those top names, go ahead. It's going to be a star-studded event. We're going to have some fun.
Yeah, everyone have fun watching the 2 college football playoff games and then the national championship game a week after. Be sure to, again, check out those names. Let us know what you think about some of these guys and if you agree with some of our takes. And thanks to everyone for watching, and thanks for listening.